Hey parents, I need to share something with you that might be difficult to hear, but it could also be the most important thing you learn about parenting. Donald Winnicott, one of the most insightful child psychologists who ever lived, discovered something that every parent needs to understand. He found that we don't just pass down our eye color or our height to our children. We also unconsciously pass down our emotional patterns, our ways of handling stress, and yes, even our childhood pain. But here's the thing that makes this discovery so powerful. Winnicott also showed us that we have the ability to break these cycles. We don't have to repeat the mistakes that were made with us. We can heal our own childhood wounds and, in doing so, give our children something different and better. Now, before we go any further, I want you to know that this isn't about blaming your parents or feeling guilty about your own parenting. Winnicott understood that most parents are doing the best they can with the tools they were given. But he also believed that awareness is the first step toward change, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me start with a story that might sound familiar. There was a mother who came to see Winnicott because she couldn't understand why she kept losing her temper with her 5-year-old son. She described herself as a patient person in every other area of her life, but something about her child's behavior triggered reactions in her that felt completely out of control. As Winnicott talked with this mother, they discovered something important. When her son would cry or express big emotions, she would feel overwhelmed by an urge to make him stop immediately. She would either become very stern and dismissive, telling him to toughen up, or she would become anxious and try to fix everything for him right away. Through their conversations, this mother began to remember her own childhood. She had grown up with parents who couldn't tolerate emotional expression. When she cried as a child, she was either punished for being too sensitive, or her parents would become so distressed by her tears that she learned to shut down her emotions to protect them. Now, as an adult, when her own child expressed big feelings, all of those old childhood experiences came flooding back. She wasn't just responding to her son's emotions. She was unconsciously reliving her own childhood fear of being too much, of being rejected for having feelings. This is what Winnicott meant when he talked about how our childhood experiences live on in our parenting. We don't consciously decide to repeat patterns from our past. Instead, our children's behaviors trigger emotional memories and responses that we might not even be aware of. Think about your own reactions to your child's behavior. Are there moments when your response feels bigger than the situation calls for? Times when you find yourself saying or doing things that surprise you. Maybe you hear your parents' voice coming out of your mouth, even when you swore you'd never parent the way you were parented. Winnicott called this phenomenon ghosts in the nursery. These are the unresolved experiences from our own childhood that show up uninvited in our parenting. They might appear when our child is the same age we were when something difficult happened to us. They might be triggered by certain behaviors, emotions, or situations that remind us unconsciously of our own childhood struggles. Here's an example that many parents can relate to. Maybe you grew up in a household where there was a lot of chaos or unpredictability. Your parents might have been dealing with their own stress, addiction, mental health issues, or relationship problems. As a child, you learned to be hypervigilant, always watching for signs of danger or conflict. Now, as a parent, you might find yourself becoming extremely anxious when your own children are loud or energetic. Their normal childhood exuberance might trigger your old survival mechanisms, making you feel like you need to control their behavior immediately to prevent some imagined catastrophe. Or maybe you grew up with very critical parents who had impossibly high standards. You learned that love was conditional on being perfect, on never making mistakes, on always achieving. Now you might find yourself being overly critical of your own children, pointing out their flaws or pushing them to excel in ways that create stress and anxiety for them. The tricky thing about these patterns is that they often come from a place of love. The parent who becomes anxious about their children's noise is trying to protect them from what they unconsciously remember as dangerous chaos. The parent who pushes their child to be perfect is trying to protect them from the rejection and criticism they experience themselves. But here's what Winnicott understood so clearly: our childhood. Survival strategies that helped us cope with difficult situations often become obstacles when we're trying to create healthy relationships with our own children. Let me share another story that really illustrates this. There was a father who found himself becoming cold and distant whenever his daughter would ask for help with something. He would become impatient and tell her she needed to figure things out for herself. This confused him because he wanted to be a supportive father, but something about her request for help made him feel almost angry. As he explored this with Winnicott, he remembered that his own father had been emotionally unavailable and had often responded to his childhood requests for help with irritation or dismissal. As a young boy, he had learned that asking for help led to rejection, so he became fiercely independent and learned to rely only on himself. Now, when his daughter asked for help, it triggered those old feelings of vulnerability and the fear of being rejected. His unconscious mind was trying to protect both of them from that potential pain by maintaining distance. But in doing so, he was recreating the very pattern that had hurt him as a child. This is how generational patterns perpetuate themselves. We unconsciously recreate familiar dynamics, even when they're painful, because they feel normal to us. Our nervous systems recognize these patterns as home, even when home wasn't always a safe or nurturing place. But here's the hopeful part of Winnicott's message, and this is why I'm sharing all of this with you. He believed that once we become aware of these patterns, we have the power to change them. The key is developing what he called reflective capacity, the ability to pause and ask ourselves what's really going on when we have strong reactions to our children's behavior. When you find yourself feeling triggered by your child, try asking yourself these questions. What am I really feeling right now? What does this situation remind me of from my own childhood? What did I need when I was my child's age that I didn't get? How can I give my child what I needed back then? This kind of self-reflection isn't always easy. It might bring up painful memories or feelings that you've been avoiding. But Winnicott believed that facing these old wounds is one of the greatest gifts we can give our children, because it frees them from having to carry the burden of our unhealed pain. Let me give you a practical example of how this might work. Let's say your child is having a tantrum in the grocery store, and you feel that familiar surge of panic and shame. Your immediate impulse might be to harshly shut down the tantrum to avoid the embarrassment you're feeling. But if you can pause for just a moment and check in with yourself, you might realize that your strong reaction isn't really about your child's behavior. Maybe it's about your own childhood experiences of being shamed for expressing emotions in public, or your fear of being judged as a bad parent the way your own parents were judged. Once you recognize what's really happening, you can make a conscious choice to respond differently. Instead of reacting from your childhood wound, you can respond from your adult wisdom and your love for your child. You might take a deep breath and remember that tantrums are normal for children, that your child isn't trying to embarrass you, and that other people's opinions about your parenting don't define your worth as a parent. From this calmer place, you can offer your child the comfort and understanding that you might have needed when you were having big feelings as a child. Winnicott also talked about something he called the good enough parent. This concept is so important for breaking generational cycles because it takes the pressure off of us to be perfect. We don't have to heal every single wound from our childhood or never make mistakes with our children. What we need to do is be willing to recognize our mistakes, repair relationships when we've caused hurt, and keep growing and learning. When We can model this kind of emotional honesty and resilience for our children. We're teaching them skills that will serve them throughout their lives. I want to share one more story that really demonstrates the power of breaking these cycles. There was a mother who had grown up with very little emotional nurturing. Her parents were loving but emotionally distant, and she had learned to be self-sufficient and not to expect much emotional support from others. When she had her own children, she found herself struggling to respond to their emotional needs. She would feel awkward when they cried, unsure of how to comfort them, and sometimes she would feel irritated by their need for emotional connection. But this mother was committed to giving her children something different than what she had received. She started paying attention to her reactions and recognizing when her childhood experiences were influencing her parenting. She began practicing, offering comfort and emotional support, even when it felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Over time, something beautiful happened. As she learned to nurture her children's emotional needs, she also began to heal her own childhood wounds. She started to understand what she had missed as a child, as she began to offer herself the same kind of compassion she was learning to give her children. Her children grew up feeling emotionally secure and supported, and they developed strong skills for handling their own emotions and supporting others. The cycle of emotional distance that had been passed down through generations was broken, and a new pattern of emotional connection and support was established. This is the power of conscious parenting, the ability to use our awareness of our own childhood experiences to make different choices with our children. It's not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about being willing to look at our own stuff, take responsibility for our reactions, and keep growing and healing alongside our children. Winnicott also emphasized that this work isn't something we do once and then we're done. Parenting will continue to bring up our old wounds and trigger our childhood patterns. Our children will challenge us in ways that force us to confront parts of ourselves we might prefer to avoid. But each time we choose awareness over reactivity, each time we pause to ask ourselves what's really going on, each time we repair a relationship after we've made a mistake, we're creating new patterns and new possibilities for our children. Remember, your children don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real, to be willing to grow, and to be committed to breaking the cycles that no longer serve your family. They need you to be brave enough to face your own childhood pain so that they don't have to carry it forward into their own lives. The beautiful thing about this work is that it not only helps our children, it helps us heal too. When we can offer our children the love, understanding, and emotional support that we needed as children, we're also offering it to the wounded child that still lives within us. So if you recognize yourself in any of these patterns, please don't feel shame or guilt. Feel hope. Feel excitement about the possibility of creating something new and different for your family. Remember that awareness is the first step, and you've already taken that step by listening to this message. Your willingness to look at these patterns with honesty and compassion is one of the greatest gifts you can give your children. You're not just raising them, you're freeing them from the invisible chains of generational pain and giving them the foundation they need to create healthy, loving relationships throughout their lives.